I'd like to welcome today Jim Norris, friend of mine, friend of ours for many, many years. How are you doing today, Jim?
I'm doing very well.
Yeah, so nice to have you. And it's really nice to have someone like you to speak to about this topic. Shaping your journey, because although many of us have done many great things, and I know you're also a drummer. Aside from being a publisher, owner, and the madman behind Canadian Musician Magazine, which I love, by the way. And why don't you talk to us about a little bit about your history before we get to the real essence of shaping your journey?
Okay. Well, I grew up with musical parents. Both my parents were in music. My father played the violin and bass, and my mom was a singer, and they were actually in a band together in the 30s in Sudbury. Um, so I came by that honestly. Played trumpet originally, played all the way through high school, concert band, marching bands, jazz bands, all of that type of thing. And then went to University of Toronto. And I like to call that program there music by dead guys. Unfortunately, it wasn't a program I really liked then. It has changed, but in those days, everything that they loved, I guess, was written before 1900. So very dead guys. So I did that for a while. And then the guys that I'd been playing with, by then I was playing drums later on in high school. And by then the guys that I'd been playing with decided they were all going to quit school and move to Toronto, and we would go full time. So I said, it took me, I think that was a letter or a phone call, because it was certainly no email in those days. So it took me about 2 seconds to decide that, yeah, I'm out of here. Finished the first year. We started rehearsing and we moved to Toronto that fall. So that was to be a year. At least that's what I told my mom. When I told my mom what I was doing, the only concern she had was, are you going to grow your hair long? And I said, well, yes, I will be. So, and ultimately it was down to my waist years later.
Wow.
But my mom then said, well, we won't be going out in public together anymore. So so I did that, and that actually turned into 7 years playing in a variety of bands. The last one was called Sea Dog, and we had some measure of success. A couple of albums, a lot of singles, a lot of touring throughout North America. And after the 7 years, I decided I was going to grow up, that I was 26. I was way too old to play rock and roll. And the other thing is that I just got tired of depending on musicians, unfortunately, because, it was always down to the weakest link in a band. And you'd have one person that was just flaky. So just got to the point where I got fed up with that. So I left, did a variety of other things for a few years. I was actually a private investigator. I was on the police force in Mississauga. After that, I was at a boating magazine, and then a housing magazine was where I really learned the industry as far as publishing goes. And then in 1979, going way back, we're talking almost 40, well, it is 43 years now, we started Canadian Musician Magazine. And there was nothing in Canada at all for musicians. And in the States, the only publication that existed was Downbeat. Well, that's not true. A guitar player started in '74, so we were very much in virgin territory, I guess. So from that, we expanded throughout the years, and we then added Canadian Music Trade later on, and then professional sound, professional lighting and production. Did a lot of different events. In the early '80s, we started Music Books Plus, selling books and DVDs and all of that, which is actually a huge part of our business now. We sell in 90 countries. We've been through a number of recessions, which are not fun. the pandemic is worse because not only did it have economic, um, you know, consequences directly, but with lockdowns, and we're in another one in Ontario now, and of course Quebec is not going through much fun either. But that'll go away as it has. We've had some up and downs, but you know what? Music is always there. It always will be. Um, Musicians had to learn a bit that they have to diversify, which they didn't do. Most of the musicians were dependent on playing clubs only. So they only had one source of income. So when that ended, they were kind of screwed. So a lot of what we did a bunch of webinars on all the streams of income that you should have. And any business owner, including musicians, should have multiple streams of income, as many as possible. And especially nowadays online. But so the smarter ones and retailers as well, a lot of them weren't doing business online. They've had to do that. So but the one good thing is that during the downturn, a lot of people learned how to record at home. So home recording became a huge market. A lot of people learned how to play instruments, especially guitar. In 2020, Fender had its worst month in its history, and by the fall had its best month in its history.
Wow.
Because the number of guitar players went up by 30-40%.
Wow.
So, and people that had played guitar years before just said, well, I'm stuck at home. I'm going to buy a new guitar. I'm going to learn how to play. I'm going to, our book business went way up because people were learning how to play and what to do and how to record. So that's, there's always another side to it for sure. Right now we're in another shutdown with good old Omicron, but that's not going to continue that much longer, I don't think. And live music was back for a while, and it'll be back again. But music never ends and never will. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. And the thing is that I really agree with you. These are times where we can take advantage of the situation. I mean, and we know that. There's a famous saying. I don't know where it actually comes from, but it says, "The village without music is a dead place." And we can't. I cannot imagine. I don't think anybody can really imagine. What the world would be like if you had no music. I mean, that's impossible. It's silence.
It's true. If you think of any movie, any television show, any play,
Sure.
anything, if you just back the music out of that, it's like, whoa, is that boring or what? And again, when there's live events, there's always music all around you, and I've hardly met anybody that doesn't like music.
Sure.
They might not like the same music I like, or they might like, but they like music, and it cuts across cultures. In some cases, with a lot of instrumental music, especially, there's no language involved. There's no nothing. It's culturally, and sometimes some styles of music show up in cultures and places it's a total surprise to everybody. And with a lot of the musicians that I've coached, is you got to be aware of that. Your music may just tank in Canada. It might, and you're sitting there in, Barrie or somewhere thinking, boy, we're doing really well. We're now conquered Barrie. And it's like, wait a minute, it's a huge world out there. And your music might be huge in Germany or in the States, or in a lot of Canadian artists have done well in England. And with the internet now, it's possible to know that. It's possible on your Facebook page to know exactly where all your traffic's coming from, and where all your streams are being played from. And then, you find out that, wait a minute, we thought this was going to be big in Montreal or Toronto, but it's turning out that, well, no, the market's actually in Texas. Or some of the heavy metal bands like Triumph, they had a huge following in Texas. And in Sweden, I think it was, even after they'd gone away for a while back, they came back and did some huge festivals in Sweden. Just massive fan base in some of these countries. And of course, a band like Rush, they were just big everywhere. Most people didn't even know they were Canadian.
That's right.
and didn't care. It
Right.
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
So, yeah, so things have changed, and I think it's, I taught at Metalworks Institute for 11 years, and taught entertainment marketing, and coached a lot of. I still hear from a lot of my students and coach them and try and help with their careers. And that's the two things I say, I guess, are think globally, and when you get started, focus on one thing, because people, they come out of there and they do 19 different things, and you can't market that. Like, are you a musician? Are you a producer? Are you a teacher? Yeah, you can ultimately be all of those things, but your initial job search or career search should be focused on just one thing, and then you can add to it. You can say, okay, I'm a really good drummer. I'm great at this, and I've got some success. And now I can. Teaching is an obvious extension, and was during the pandemic. That was an obvious one, because you could do it online. You could charge for it. But even, producing and songwriting is, every musician should be a songwriter. Everybody should belong to SOCAN or ASCAP or BMI. That's just period. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything to be a songwriter. It's easy. And in any band, if you look back at the Beatles, the two songwriters at that time made all the money. That's the way it was split. They got 60%, and Ringo and George Harrison at the time got 40%. That's the way it worked out. So it's a natural thing. And if a lot of the artists that were completely screwed during the pandemic, if they'd been a songwriter for years with some success, at least they would have money coming in from SOCAN every month. And then you could do jingles, and I mean, there's just so many sources of income that you don't think of until you're screwed. And
Yes.
then the only source of income you think is driving for Skip the Dishes or something. But and that's important for any business. Have different sources of income, and different markets. If you're a drummer, certainly master all the different styles. Certainly you have to be able to read. That's important. A lot of drummers can't, or can't so far, but you
Or
can
think
learn
they don't
that.
need to. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's true. You can, suffer through without reading, but you open up your possibilities like crazy if you can read. All of a sudden, you can do studio work, and you can do all kinds of things, and you can learn that. Unless you're dead, you can still learn. So and obviously, teaching is a skill in itself. There's just so much. I think we did a webinar on that. We identified about 20 different streams of income that musicians should have and should have had in the first place. And then they would have been somewhat pandemic proof, because a lot of it they could have done from home, and they'd still have some revenue coming in, which is important. In any kind of business, whether you're a retailer or a manufacturer or anything, having those different streams of income are important.
Sure. It's like a wave, right? Because you never know. One part of it is great today, another part of it another time, and you have these impediments or challenges that come up, and you can still ride through. But if you're a one-trick pony,
Yeah,
you're stuck, right?
and
Yeah.
they're just opportunities too. But in looking at all the recessions that we've been through, which is a lot, you'd see the cycle there. And in good times, people just get lazy and they get sloppy, and they have revenue coming in, so they don't. There's a lot of things they don't do, and then when a recession hits, it's all of a sudden, where did the money go? Right? We better look at doing things a different way. We better cut some non-essential expenses, which is not marketing, and look at ways of finding revenue from other places, and in the good times, put some money away for the bad times.
Yeah.
Because I remember the very first couple of recessions, I had one client that was complaining, and I was saying, well, what's your plan for the next recession? And they'd say, you're kidding me, there's going to be another one? I said, yeah. I researched that recession started in 1780 at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The difference was in those days, nobody really knew because there was no CNN. So you'd go through a recession and you'd kind of feel it. But there was recessions roughly every 8 to 10 years from 1780 up until today. And you can count on it that, when one ends, about 8 to 10 years later, there'll be another one. It's a course correction. But the key is during the really good time, keep things tight and keep your expenses under control as well, and put some money away for marketing mostly, so that when you hit the bad time, you can continue to market. And I've got some clients that are smart that way. I've got a client in the pro audio market named Gear Audio, and they've just done it so smart this time. They've taken probably 14 lines away from competitors, which is great. They've increased their marketing drastically. And, they've gone through a tough time because a lot of their market is live sound, which of course didn't exist there for a while. But in the long run, that they are going to do really well, and they are. And they just take a long view of things, not just, the cash flow dried up this afternoon, because it's going to come back, but it may not come back to you. It may come back to your competitor because they're doing things better.
Yeah, and also things just don't go away. They will be different. They might be bigger, better, whatever, but it certainly it would be different. I mean, all the manufacturers. I was noticing a few of them. I won't mention names, but I was bewildered why they suddenly disappeared. Went under a rock. They won't even answer their phones, and I'm saying,
I know
that's strange. This is the time we should be answering your phone.
I think if I were to look back at it, I actually have statistics on every recession as to what people did, and it was very consistent. And I haven't really done the research to see by company if it was the same. And I get the sense that it probably was. But now that would mean that those companies would still have to be here. Now, some of the ones that stopped marketing altogether years ago probably aren't here anymore. They either got bought or just disappeared or put out of business. But I would expect that their attitude towards adversity is probably consistent. And there are some. I've even said, "Are you ready to come out from the bushes yet? Are you going to come out from under the rock?" Because when you do, your customers are probably gone somewhere else because they're not going to just stop existing. And if you're not promoting and you're not offering good service and like you say, nobody answers the phone.
Amazing.
I find it amazing that companies now are way worse at answering email. Well, wait a minute, what's that all about? And way worse at answering the phone, if they do at all. And I know they're working at home, a lot of them, but the phone's right there, and there's your email.
Right.
A lot of it is COVID brain, I call it.
Yeah, and also sometimes it's just a lack of understanding of being visionary or just understanding how it works. I mean, we're all in that same boat, right? So what are we all doing? We are maybe consuming less. Maybe we're buying less drumsticks or less since we're not out there. But at some point, you're going to need these things. So, and you're the people who are there physically now, you've got a much bigger market because now, especially in this case, we've expanded the technology. And the technology has expanded to meet our expectations, and we're pushing each other. Now we're getting to a point where any market, per se, for a musician or a manufacturer is 100 times larger than it used to be. It's amazing.
Yeah, and the only one that was really, really badly impacted was band instruments. It was the worst. Most of the rest, I talk to Yamaha Canada quite often, and from Steve Butterworth, I got all through the pandemic, and most of their categories grew. Guitar the most, home recording second, but drums were big, and bass and keyboards grew a lot.
Right.
And a lot of stores said they had a lot of new customers, like sometimes 30-40% people. They never, even in a small town, they'd have these people coming in and like, who are you? Like, where were you? Where were you all these years? And yet they got interested in music, and they had time at home. And maybe, way back when in their 20s, they played in a band, and now their software, huge, especially home recording, all of those things. And then, obviously once live music is here permanently, it had a few months there. Well, people are out there, they're playing and they're having fun and all of those things. Bands are back out there. So, uh, all the instruments, I mean, they just don't go away. Even all the music by dead guys instruments, they're still here. Some of those instruments have been here for hundreds of years, and you really notice that in Europe. Like when I go to Europe, I just notice the number of people over there that play classical music and all the traditional instruments is just huge. It's from day one. They play all those instruments, and they can be 8 years old and they're playing in an orchestra somewhere. It's just humongous how big it is, and here it is as well. But in the States, marching bands just humongous.
Yeah, yeah,
It's so big down there. Every college, every university, every high school has a marching band. Um, and they have some of those marching bands have like 300 people in them and good players.
yes.
Like you look at some of the drummers in those marching bands, whoa, they got killer technique. It's just like, amazing.
Yeah, and I mean that's a vision thing. That's in general, people understand the importance of music. Not just the thing about it makes you smarter, but it's also social, economic. It's also it's a whole package, and getting people together, people expanding, and now. I mean, like I was saying earlier, with this whole technology and the platforms that are coming out, we can play live when the live music will start, and it surely will, but also on the live playing person to person is going to go be huge because there are platforms, and I know there are a couple coming out in very shortly that you can play with no delay whatsoever live.
Yeah.
One to one, but also in groups at different places. So you can have a
Yeah.
singer in LA, you can have the band dispersed all over North America and Europe, and there's going to be no delay. And I've seen the tests. I was witness to some of the beta testing that they did, and I'm just flabbergasted. So
It's
we're going to
very,
go
very
into another
close.
era, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. And collaboration is big on the internet, whether it's songwriting or whether it's recording or whether
Yeah.
it's playing live. I mean, there's so many things that rather than just whining about it, is what are the opportunities? I think especially teaching online is like, well, you know that. I mean, you've done it, and all of a sudden you got students anywhere in the world.
Sure.
It doesn't matter, right? It
Oh,
doesn't matter where they
absolutely.
are. You
The
set it
only
up, you do it professionally, and you make sure that you're offering something of value, and you charge for it because it should be, and that's just becoming huge, and that won't go away.
no, absolutely.
It's great that teachers can teach in person, but to expand that and to be teaching somebody in Belgium or in Africa or Australia or anywhere, is just incredible. And that those students can have access to the best teachers in the world right in their basement or wherever it is. That's an incredible opportunity for everybody, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean it just opens up a whole other world. I mean we had
Yeah.
done this kind of experimentation at COSA like, way back as far as maybe 15, 18 years ago, where we would do some online things. Alan Molnar was in on the team pushing, and we would try different things. I would be in Australia, he would be in New York, and we would perform together. Or at COSA, we'd bring somebody in to perform with one of us, and we've always experimented, but that was on a very limited scale. Now it's off the charts. I mean,
Yeah.
and you can connect with people all over the planet. If I mean, all that we've done, for example, at COSA with our programs all over the world. Obviously, we haven't been everywhere all over the world, but people hear of us, and so I was contacted recently by somebody in India to do a master class. So the
Wow.
next step would be the day we can travel safely. I will go there and we'll do an event in India and follow that up. So it's the whole thing has changed.
Yeah, it really has. In I mean, India is such a big market. It's over 1 billion people.
Mm.
Most of them speak English. It's largest speaking English country in the world. Like
That's
I
true.
think like 800 million speak English there, something crazy like that.
Yeah,
And yeah, there's a lot of poverty, but there's also a lot of opportunity there.
sure.
Um,
And everyone is in constant development anyway. What I wanted to ask you is getting back to our main theme of shaping your destiny. Now, I want to take you back a little bit, Jim.
sure,
You
sure.
were you at one moment. I mean, you were a professional drummer. You were touring, and at one point you got into the publishing, because this is where what you are known for is being publisher of the Canadian Musician magazine, and all the offshoots of that. But what was that moment that what decided who was there a person, was there an event, something that turned you, that changed your trajectory to bring you there? Otherwise, you would not be here. You would be doing something else. So this is, you always, as I always think, they say to people, you always are where you should be, according to the decisions you made.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't as planned as all that in a lot of ways. I mean, I kind of fell into publishing because I was interested in marketing and publishing, and went out and got a job in the industry and got interested in it, and then worked with a Better magazine. And at that point, I guess I just looked at my two backgrounds, my background in music and the education I'd gotten in publishing, and decided, well, there's a hole here. We have a huge country here, and this is way before the internet or any way that people could communicate. So I just saw that there's musicians all across the country that are by themselves, basically. I mean, they're in a small town somewhere. They have no information. They could maybe read guitar player or downbeat or something, get some information, but some of that wasn't relevant. So that was kind of the initial part, was to get them information and connect them all together in some way. And that there seemed to be a need for that. And there was, and there is. And now there's different ways of doing it, which we embrace. But even then, that's 42 years ago, that was kind of the motivation, and to say, and the one thing is that when you start something, sometimes you're just stupid. I mean, if you go back and if you knew what you knew later, you probably wouldn't do it, because you never thought about collecting money, as an example. You just thought, well, we'll send out some invoices, the cash will come pouring in. Wrong. you know
Right.
Selling, advertising, and just all the different things that you have to do. You just think, well, this is no problem. Well, no, it is a problem. And all the government things that you don't know about, that nobody tells you about, like, and there wasn't, that information wasn't around 42 years ago. So
Right.
there wasn't a little manual how to do this or how to run a business. And a lot of the government stuff would just show up. You'd get a letter from them saying, well, no, you got to file this with the National Library. It's like, what? Where did that come from?
That's right.
Or you have to pay your taxes on time, or all these things that you have to do that you didn't know about. And if you did, you'd probably say, whoa. Uh,
It would be too
maybe that's
overwhelming, right?
Well, you are. It's kind of being ignorant of all the impediments, or just not caring. And sometimes that's what it takes. You just say, well, it doesn't matter. Just going to do it anyway. And that's sometimes, certainly with the students that I had over the years, that was something I taught them. That if you've got a passion for something, no matter how much negativity there is. And in my first class at Metalworks, every term, the first thing I always said, how many of you have somebody in your life that think you're crazy for going into the music industry? And every person put their hand up, 100%.
Yep.
And I'd say, well, is that your parents or your wife or your girlfriend or your brother? And usually it'd be all of the above. They'd say, well, God, what are you doing? Why aren't you like your brother Herb, who's an accountant? And my attitude is, well, to hell with them. It doesn't matter, right? Are they happy? Probably not. And if you've got that passion, you just move ahead, you just do it, and you tackle all the stuff. And if it's worthwhile doing, it's going to be hard. It's just, if you read biographies on successful people, they went through hell in a handcart. And usually just before it became successful was when they hit the most resistance. It's a truism. It's true in music. It's true in businesses, that just before you hit that time where you're going to take off, with artists and bands, it's definitely true. You hit the worst time. Just everybody hates you and hates what you're doing, except for this small core audience. And that's when most quit. They just pack it in. They just say, well, no, we're not going to do this. And that's with businesses too. You just see it just before they developed enough of an audience. They just said, well, we're not going to do this. I'm just going to go and get a job at, Dairy Queen or something. And
Right.
and it's true with so many,
Yep.
with Microsoft and with Federal Express, or you read any of these people, and they just went through the worst. That the ideas they had, especially FedEx, everybody thought he was nuts. He did his treatise for his degree was overnight delivery, and his professor failed him. said that's not possible and never will be. Right? We deal with the post office, and he said, well, no, I'm going to do this, right? But I think it's the first plane that flew had like 3 packages on it or something. And some of the people said, well, that wasn't very good. Well, look at FedEx now, and look at UPS, and look at Purelator, and look at on and on and on, right? He started a whole industry, but went through hell
Sure.
in the beginning years, in every way, family-wise and financially. And that's just kind of a trend. But sometimes it's, when you look at Nike and their motto that says, just do it. I mean, that's what it is. Quit talking, like just do it.
Yeah.
And then you find out quickly, is this going to work, or is this not going to work, or does it need some course correction? But some people do, like, they're planning and they're planning and they're planning. And it's like, what have you done? Well, I'm planning. Well, wait a minute. Planning's good, but at some point you got to actually do something. And it's true with music too. If you're a musician, you got to get out of the basement in normal times. Now it's hard to get out of the basement, but in normal times, you got to get out and play somewhere and actually put yourself in front of people. And maybe people won't like it, or maybe they will, but you can't just say, gee, we're going to play a gig someday. Well, that's very
When
nice.
I'm ready. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're never ready. I mean, you're never ready. There's some nights you're not even ready after 20 years.
Right.
It's just, but you just do it, right?
No, that's right. And often what it is it's really just having that germ in your mind. In my own retrospect, if I have this idea in my mind, sometimes you don't know what it takes to get there, but you see it. You totally see it. And
Exactly. Visualization.
Yeah. And that's the way I've always worked. I only figured it out later that what was happening is I would see it, and I would see it in 3D. And then I would just figure out, okay, how do I get there? It's like looking at New York and then saying, okay, that's what New York looks like, and that's where I'm going to be. And so then you figure out, well, do I walk? If I take a car, well, it would have to be this way. The bridge might be closed. So you have to go through that path, and you make certain decisions. That's why, in retrospect, in this whole thing, all of us in our own ways have to make those decisions, and we do. Sometimes it's people who show you the way. Others will teach you the way. Like, in your case, you're teaching your students in your environment, and we teach students. We also teach students not just to play percussion, drums. We're also often mentors, because we tell them, if this is what you want to do, you have to think like this. So we work on the attitude, the thought process, and because none of us are copies of each other. So whatever you want to do, you can get there, but you have to work, and it's always going to be a lot of work, right? But
For sure.
if you
But
enjoy it,
but the thing is, in your case and in our case, we've both created things that didn't exist before. Sometimes people don't understand that. They just think, well, it's been there a long time. Well, wait a minute. There was a day where Cosa period didn't exist, and Cosa Cuba certainly didn't exist, right? And you
right?
just made it up. It's
Yeah,
not like somebody came along and said, okay, Aldo, here is the program, right? And that's what a lot of kids want. I want to know, I want the instructions how to do this. Well, there is no instructions because it's never been done before. Do I know it's going to work? It will work because I will make it work. Do I know how to do that exactly? No, not really. But I made that up, and now it's okay. Well, that exists, and sometimes younger people, especially, they'll look at something like that and just say, "Well, you're lucky." Well, no, wait a minute. Now, I just woke up one day and said, "I'm going to do this." Like with everything that we do, with no, with everything, we didn't buy any of our properties from any. But well, we bought one book distribution company along the way that was our competitor. But other than that, we just made it all up. We made up the magazines and made up the seminars and all these things and then figured out how to do them. But there wasn't a plan that somebody came along and said, here you go, here's a plan for this, and this is exactly what to do. And I find sometimes that's what people want. There isn't a plan for your life. You got to make it.
that's right.
And a lot of them expect you to do that for them or to get them a job, right? Well, I'm not getting you a job. You get jobs yourself. I can
Right.
help you.
Or create that job. I mean,
Well,
it
that's even better. Exactly.
yes.
That's the other option. Is there's a lot of. There was once a student at Metalworks. He was one of my best students, and one of the things he won was a placement at Universal Music, and he got an hour's time with the CEO at Universal Music at the time. And he went there, and they had a good discussion. And at the end, usually what happens is nothing. I mean, it's very nice. You'll get a recommendation maybe, but the CEO just said, "How'd you like to work at Universal Music?" And he went, "What?" And he said, "Okay." And he walked down the hall with him to HR and said, "Okay, you have to hire this person." And HR person said, "What do you mean, to do what?" And the CEO just said, "I don't care. He can't leave the building."
Beautiful,
And
beautiful,
that
brilliant.
happened. I've hired a couple of people where that was the case, where they just pursued us to death. And then the staff would say, "Well, you're not letting them leave, are you?" "What do you mean?" "Well, they can't leave. They have to work here." And you're right. And sometimes you just created a position for them because they were just such a good person to have. Or in some cases, you can't get a job. We'll just start a position. Start a freelance version of it, whatever it is.
Yep. No,
And
and
they go,
I've always thought of it that way. If it doesn't exist, not everything on the planet exists, and some
no,
people have created those things. I mean, Henry Ford, when he developed the assembly line, I don't think he looked over to his right and said, "Ah, there's an assembly line. Why don't we try that over here?" It was just an idea. How do you build cars faster?
yeah,
So you create it, and
yeah,
if you wait in your home for the phone to ring, I mean, I've never done that. I always, if somebody called me for something, of course I would love to do it, and I did it. Otherwise, I just did what I thought should be done, and I did it. That's all.
yeah,
you know,
yeah. Well, exactly. And that's people get too afraid of failure and afraid of somebody criticizing them. And it's like, to hell with that, just do it and do it well and then learn as you go. And then, part of what you were talking about earlier is connecting with the right people. And that's important. Like there's a saying is, I'm trying to remember how that's, you you can't fly like an eagle if you work with a bunch of turkeys. And that's true. I can't even remember who said that, but it's true that if you have to choose the people around you very carefully, whether it's in a company or a band or even just your friends, that you want to be with people that have skills but also have positive attitudes. And you need to have people, like I have a certain number of people that I know that if I call them, it's going to be good for me and it's going to be good for them, because we're going to have it's always John Harris at Harris Institute is like that. We call, we talk for an hour, and then we'll both say, well, now that we've solved all the world's problems, but it's a worthwhile. And then there's other people, you call them up and all it is how bad everything is and how this is sad and how sick I am. And it's like, you don't need those people. Like, what do they bring to your life in any way, whether it's personally, fortunately with your family, you can't always choose them. So you're going to have some family members I developed the skill to not really listen to them. So you'd kind of say, yes, yes, sir. But in your brain, you'd say, no, sir. And you don't have choice there. They're your relatives
That's
and
right. That's right.
you love them dearly, but in some cases you just don't want their influence. But in business, you can certainly choose, can't choose your customers necessarily always, but you can choose a lot of them. And certainly in your personal life, you can totally choose who you spend your time with. And that's
Exactly.
important.
No,
That's important.
being surrounded with the people who reflect your own beliefs and also will help you stay on your path. I mean, it's some people say, well, you have to have a positive attitude. You have to have, you can't fail. It's not true. I mean, you just
No,
have to know that everything is possible. Period. Now, if you want to be part of that, you want to be making something, then you have to go through the process and make decisions.
yeah.
And it's always going to be a good decision. Sometimes that decision it brings you to a disaster. Well, a disaster because, you used the wrong materials, so it fell apart. Now, you learn from that. You learn from those mistakes. Mistakes are good. They're a learning process, right?
People that make the most mistakes are the ones that succeed the most. It's a fact. And you just don't know that because that's not in their PR. The fact that they went bankrupt 37 times, and Babe Ruth was the home run king, and he was also the strikeout king. He
Okay.
struck out all the time. If you look at his statistics, because he swung at everything. He didn't go up there thinking, oh my God, I wonder if I'll strike out. He said every time he went up there, he said, I'm hitting this out of the park. And he struck out a lot. But he also hit the sucker out of the park a lot, and he had both those honors of being the home run king and the strikeout king.
Interesting.
And that's true for Edison is my poster child for sure, because Edison failed 10,000 times when he was working on the light bulb. 10,000 times. I mean, I'm pretty persistent, but not that much. And everybody around him said, Tom, like, pack it in. Let's just leave it dark. This ain't going to work. Even his wife said, come to bed. Like, obviously that's not working. But 10,001, the light came on, right? And his attitude was every time he tried something that didn't work, he was getting closer to what would work. And that's an amazing, and he invented the light bulb. He invented the phonograph, which is pretty important. He invented the stock ticker, which not that relevant anymore. But he also improved drastically on the telephone with Alexander Graham Bell. And his biography alone is just a lesson in, and became really rich. Basically, he didn't invent electricity, but he certainly made it a lot more popular with Edison Electric and all of that. Because the electricity was already there, but there wasn't much to plug into it until he invented the light bulb. So, but that's one of and there's a lot of other stories like that too, of people that just virtually didn't listen to anybody. They just kept going
Yep.
and did what seemed to other people as impossible.
Yeah, and it's all about shaping your journey. I mean, you're
Yeah,
always working on it. You have some people call it a vision, some people call it a belief, but if you see it in your mind's eye, if it's there, it exists. So the
Yeah,
moment you see that, it exists. Now you just have to figure out how to make it work,
yeah.
financially, logistically, and otherwise.
But planning is, we've done a webinar on career planning. And I've, done it live and I've done it online, done it at the NAM show. And it's basically how to develop a kick-ass career plan. And most people don't have one. Most people put more preparation into their holidays than their life. And that's a fact. It's only a small percentage that have any kind of life plan whatsoever. It's about 5% of people
Really?
in general,
Wow,
and it's about
5%.
it's about 2% that actually accomplish any of that. But it's only about 5% that have any plan whatsoever, nothing. And yet, if they go somewhere on a holiday, they know where they're going, they know when, they know for how long. Nowadays, they've got their hotel booked. They figured out where to get the money from. In many cases, they booked all their restaurants and all of that. They put a lot of effort into that. But ask them, what are you going to be doing in 5 years? Oh, I don't know. You always hear a lot, we'll see what happens. Well, no, you won't see what happens because nothing's going to happen. And musicians are particularly bad at that.
Yeah.
I've worked with a lot of them, and there is no plan of any kind, like nothing. We'll put out a record and we'll see what happens. And you hear that in business too. We'll see what happens. Well, no, you won't. And the other one that kills me is I want to find myself. No, you want to make yourself. You don't want to find yourself. There's nothing to find because you haven't made anything yet. But you hear that one a lot, especially in the hippy dippy 60s, that they're going to just sit out somewhere and get stoned and find themselves. Well, there's nothing to find because there's nothing there, So you need a balance of planning and execution is really what it comes down to. And
Yeah.
I find most people are, most people are bad at both of those, but people tend to be stronger at one, is that they're a planner and that's all they do. They never do anything. Or they're a doer and there is no plan. So they just go off and go crazy and do all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But ideally, if you can, of course you can, a balance of those two skills, because that's what they are, is what's required. And what works is have a plan, but take some action.
Yeah,
And,
no,
and,
the
and I'll,
the action thing is the most important. I mean, obviously, and
yeah,
I mean, in my own situation, I remember when I finally left Ottawa, I was accepted at McGill, and I decided at that point that I wanted to be a studio musician, and Montreal was where I was going to do my training. I was going to study in New York, move to New York, be a studio musician in New York, then LA because of the weather. Being a Southern Italian,
I didn't know any of that.
yeah, and there you are. That was my
Yeah,
original plan.
that's a
you know?
that's a good plan though.
Yeah, and I worked that. I went to New York a lot. I was going every month. During the summers, I would spend 2 and 3 weeks studying with different people, meeting everybody. So I knew a lot of people in New York. In some of the sessions, the guys would ask me, why don't you do the sound check for the session and then catch the session? So I'd be introduced to all the contractors, and then I'd be there watching the session. So I was learning like crazy.
Yeah,
And I'd take lessons from some of the guys too. Like I'd study with Bernard Purdy just before
yeah,
his sessions. We'd sit there and do the lesson in the drum booth, and then I would stay for the recording. Hung out with Steve Gadd a lot. He used to drive in his little Honda Civic, but I'd be
yeah,
watching and learning. And then I thought, my whole plan was, okay, I would come here and then go to LA, Los Angeles for the climate, and that was I was seeing it. I was totally seeing it. But then I got too busy in Montreal. I couldn't even fly to New York anymore. With my repercussions, started touring, and I started doing a lot of studio work here, both on percussion and drums. I was like 3 people here.
yeah.
And then
I,
I was doing a national TV show, and then I said, well, I guess that the original plan isn't going to work. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna do it otherwise. I'm doing it now, but indirectly, right?
sure. Yeah, that was one thing I learned when I went to U of T, is that all the best musicians, no matter what level they were at, took lessons from somebody north of them, no matter where they were from. And I was from Sudbury, and after a while on trumpet, I kind of ran out of people to take lessons from. But then when I went to Toronto, that changed because now you had access
Of
to the
course.
guys in the Toronto Symphony. But then when you met the guys in the Toronto Symphony, they would fly to New York once a month and have a lesson with the principal trumpet player at the New York Philharmonic, right? And you'd say, "You take lessons?" And they'd say, "Of course." But you're my teacher. Yeah, but I take lessons. And anytime an orchestra came to Toronto, they would connect with that person. If it was the principal trumpet player, if it was, Berlin Philharmonic or whatever it was, and they'd connect with them, and they'd go to their hotel room and pay them and have an hour's lesson with one of the best players in the world. And
Sure.
all of the classical guys were like that. All of the jazz guys were like that too. Whenever they had an opportunity, wherever they were in the world, and now that's so easy because you can do it online. But I was amazed that all of them took lessons from people that could teach them something. And when you're younger, you don't realize that. You figure, well, they're the teacher. They don't
That's right. Yeah.
they don't learn anything. They just teach, right? And
Right.
the first time I heard that, I went, "Whoa, that's pretty cool."
Yeah. And I always did that. And every opportunity, I was like, I had to learn everything because I had so much. When I saw what I had to learn, I said, I got to fast
Yeah,
forward and everybody I can get my hands on.
yeah,
And sometimes people would come to town. I remember once Mongo Santa Maria was in town playing, and I got friendly. I went to see the band every night, and I went and I asked the timbale player, Steve Berrios, who's a great timbale player. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of Cuban style here, so I was learning from all of these guys in New York.
yeah,
So I would bring him over to my studio, pay him for the lesson, and my studio was like 4 blocks from the venue, so it was easy to do that. And hang out and learn from these guys, or I'd go down there and meet up with them, whoever they were, Michael Walden, and whoever they were, just to know and learn from them. And then
yeah,
sometimes you get on a specific mission that you need to a special groove, a special concept. Who would know? So I'd be, asking everybody, who do I see? Who is that person? And of course, you never perfect it, but it's the path,
no,
and it's a great thing because at the same time, you become friends with a lot of people who are always open to give you information and inspiration.
for sure.
You know,
And when you go to Cuba, as an example, and you hear some of the players there, it's like, whoa. I mean, they're so poor, and they really don't have a lot of education necessarily, but they've got the Latin music in their blood. And you just, even at the hotel we used to stay at, and you see the players and like the drummers and all of them, and it's just like, oh, this is in a different world now. These
yeah.
people are
But the thing is, in that particular case, Jim, I mean, they do get a lot of education in music. So those people who are playing in the
that's true.
hotels actually are licensed to play in the hotels because they're
No, you're
professionals
right.
and they're not
That that's
allowed to.
that's true
There's no
because, yeah, a
such
lot.
thing.
No, well, there's no literacy in Cuba. Everybody
Yeah,
has
but
education
specifically
of some sort.
specifically for the music part of it, it's like the paradigm of medicine or law that we have here or most places, they have there as well in music. So you
Right.
can't go play anywhere if you just pick up a guitar and you sing and you're good. It doesn't happen. It
Yeah.
would be like you're a great law mind and you studied and you're really good at this, or you've been cutting people open and doing operations, but you never went to school. You can't
Yeah.
you
No,
can't be
no, you're
working in a
right.
hospital. It would
The
not be allowed.
the hotel we stayed at a lot, the sound guy, Eduardo, who we got to know really well, he had actually gone to Russia, and he had a master's degree in sound reinforcement, like really way more
Yeah.
educated than any front of house guy here. And the big problem he had is he could never get any equipment. His stuff would break down, and he couldn't get
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah,
But
but
yeah,
it's
you're
but
right.
that's an interesting thing, Jim. That there, the government has that paradigm, parallel paradigm, in music, the same as you do in law or medicine. So
Yeah,
those people like Chucho Valdez, well, that's the A level. They can go travel all over the world,
right.
but they belong to like a kind of a union, and they're represented by different agencies, which is all one but different names. But what happens is that they have to go through audition processes. We say even to play in a hotel. No, we don't say even. No, that's an important position. That's like saying if you're not a cook, you're not going to be in a restaurant. So you
Right.
have to be of the level, and they have to be accepted even to play in those bands. They go through audition processes like in an orchestra, and
Right.
then when they play in those places, they have to be at the level, and they're constantly auditioned or recertified, for lack of a better word. So the levels are always high, and we're always amazed. How can they be so good? Well, it's like saying, "Gee, that doctor in that hospital was so good." Well, yeah, he's some better than others, but still they're professional people, and that's why they're there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and
Interesting though.
they take culture very seriously in Cuba, like very seriously. All kinds of culture, whether it's music or dance or fashion or whatever it is. And even though the people have no money, they that's just a huge part of their life, and they can dance like crazy. Like it's just embarrassing. You'd never get on the floor. Even the servers at the hotel, when they would get up and dance, it'd be like, whoa, it's incredible
And we
how.
should all be dancing, right, Tim? I mean, it's
Well, we
crazy that
should.
everything happens in our heads,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
No, they're so good at it, and you see, people. There's actually a Cuban restaurant in Niagara Falls where we are called Mojito House, and Mo and I would go there just to watch them dance. We're not going to get up there, that's for sure. But you'd see people that they looked like they'd known each other for 20 years, but they just met,
Yeah.
and yet they would get up on the floor, and I guess they learned that somewhere, or they're born with that. I don't even know what it is, but we found that in Cartagena, the same thing. 16 years old, they get up, never even met before, and they dance as if they danced together forever.
Yeah.
And you just watch that and you go, whoa, I'm not going anywhere near that. It's
Part-
it's
and
actually incredible.
Yeah, and a lot of it is social education, and also the educational system
Yeah,
in the West or here, certainly North America. You're not allowed. You don't. Creativity is stopped at grade 2. And
yeah,
you're not allowed to. And now certainly it's even worse. There's no dancing. There's no creativity. There's very little music. Very little, in the general sense.
yeah,
Whereas those things, like dance, movement, speaking, music, theater, should be a very basic part of the curriculum for life, and from zero.
yeah,
Then they would become, if they become lawyers, doctors, bankers, whatever, they would be a lot better equipped to deal with the world, to deal with everything that comes to them, or the decisions they make are based on what they really want and what they're really good at and where they're going to spend the most time, right? That would make a lot of sense, right?
yeah. Well, it's just convincing politicians some of those things.
Now, I mean, the educational systems are, 18th and early 19th century systems that they haven't
Yeah,
bothered to look at yet. Maybe IT might fix that.
yeah.
Who knows?
Oh,
But
it's true.
anyway, but it's really interesting when we speak about the decisions we make that take us in our trajectories, and where we go with that, and each one of us with the talents and interests we have is obviously takes us to where we go for
Yeah,
life, right?
yeah. No, it's true. But unfortunately, a lot of people just try to blame it on something else. They'll blame it on their parents. They'll blame it on their teachers, their friends, their spouse, the companies they work for, the government. And in many cases, those are decisions. I mean, some aren't, but a lot of it are decisions, and uh, some worked out well and some didn't for a variety of reasons. But just some people take credit for the things that work out well, and the ones that don't it's easier just to blame somebody else. But that's not the way it works. You do choose your friends for sure. You do choose where you work. You do choose who you marry. Well, you don't choose your kids, I guess, but there's a lot of it is choices, and the people that you work with and live with, and that influence your attitude.
Yep. No, and you're a good role model for all of this. I mean, you through thick and thin, you believe in this thing, and it has its place, and you've done really well. And thank God you're still there. I mean, it's nice to see one of the few magazines still around and
Yeah,
relevant and important. And
yeah. Well, I'm
it's
also really stubborn. That's the other part.
well, in some cases you have to be if you
Oh, you
believe
do.
it.
Yeah. No,
It's you, and you've done a
no,
great
you
job.
do. Yeah, I'm. If somebody says you can't do it, then I kind of just do the opposite there. I'm stubborn that way, and you have to be that way. And a lot of people are. They've done, some of the people I mentioned, and there's lots of musicians that were that way. Rush went through all kinds of ups and
Oof.
downs, and they were ready to pack it in at one time. And luckily, the next album did really well, and they didn't. But they were almost at that point where they were going to just go away and pack it in, and that's and how you don't even know how many artists did, because you don't know their names anymore. They had some success, and they just said, no, I can't do this, and they're gone.
Yeah, yeah. No, and you have to take things into your own hands. I remember with Neil Peart that you mentioned it. He had people around him didn't believe what he was doing, where he was at musically. So
Yeah,
he left. He went to England,
yeah,
and he was a tour guide or something for a little bit, just to sustain himself until he got into the system over there a little bit, and then came back with a whole new mindset, and
yeah,
then joined the band, and the rest is history, as they say,
yeah,
right?
yeah. No, it's for sure, and
But
he's legendary in a lot of ways. His attitude, his technique, and his attitude towards life, for sure.
yeah, no, he was another great role model in that regard. That it doesn't matter what they think. This is what we want to do, and they stuck it
For
out
sure.
and proved
Yeah,
it on your
definitely.
own terms, right?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. And as
Thank
I
you.
say, to be continued, huh?
Absolutely. We'll talk again.